If you think chest armor in Albion Online is just about defenses or the ability it gives you, I've got bad news. Because your chest piece does way more than that. It literally defines how hard you hit, how much you heal, how long you survive, how impactful your crowd control is, and whether your entire build actually works in real PvE and PvP fights. This is part 2 of my Albion gear breakdown series. Last time we covered helmets, where the armor type doesn't affect your stats at all and it's really just about the ability you choose. But chest armor is a whole different story. Here your armor type directly changes your stats and affects your entire build. And that makes all the difference. Cloth gives you the most damage and healing power. Plate gives you the most raw tankiness and crowd control. Leather sits right in the middle, a hybrid of offense and defense. In this video, I'll break down every chest armor in Albion Online. The stats they give, the roles they play, the abilities they offer, and how to pick the one that actually fits your build, your content, and your goals. When you pick a chest armor in Albion Online, you're not just choosing an ability. You're locking in your entire stat baseline. Unlike helmets, chest pieces have massive stat differences based on armor type. These affect everything: your damage, your healing, your defenses, energy sustain, and even how long your crowd control lasts. Let's break it down. Cloth armor gives you the highest offensive bonuses, with up to an additional 50% to damage and healing. Its passives push that even further by increasing those stats, speeding up your casts, or reducing energy costs. But defensively, it's the squishiest. You get the lowest armor, the lowest magic resist, and minimal crowd control resistances. Plate armor is the opposite. It's all about durability. You get the highest armor and magic resist, the strongest CC resist, and up to 50% increased duration on your crowd control effects. Plate passives stack even more defense or CC bonuses on top. But offensively, you get up to an additional 10% or sometimes nothing at all. Leather armor sits right in the middle, a true hybrid. Solid defenses, solid damage, and versatile passives that boost your core stats, auto attacks, or overall cooldowns. That flexibility is why leather is so popular in solo builds. Now here's something important a lot of players miss. Even within the same armor type, like two different cloth robes, the stats can vary. Some robes give you more raw damage and healing, while others trade a bit of that for extra defenses. But your specific armor choice, with its unique ability, fine-tunes how your build actually plays. So before we even get into specific chest pieces, just remember, your armor type sets your baseline, and it's one of the biggest factors in whether your build actually works for the content you're doing. Now that you understand how armor type and your specific armor affects your stats, let's talk about what your armor actually does. Just like helmets, every chest armor in Albion comes with 3 active abilities that you can freely swap between outside of combat. And these aren't just throwaway skills. They are all viable, have real use cases, and can completely change how your build plays. Choosing the right ability for the right situation can be the difference between winning or losing a PvP fight, or having just enough sustain to push through tough PvE content. Here's the key thing to know. You're not just choosing between cloth, leather, or plate armor. You're choosing the actual role of your setup, whether that's burst damage, mitigation, healing boosts, energy sustain, cooldown resets, or simply buying enough time to win a fight. So from here on, we're going to go through every single chest armor in the game, and I'll walk you through what each one does, when it's worth using, and what kind of builds or content it tends to shine in. Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Albion Online gear breakdown series. So far, we've covered all the helmets, cloth armor, and leather armor. And today, we're finishing the chest pieces with the third category, plate. Plate armor gives you the highest base defenses in the game, and many of its abilities make you even tankier. Some offer powerful crowd control that can stop entire groups, others provide team-wide buffs, or even boost your offensive stats like damage and CC. As always, you'll learn everything you need to know about them. And next up, we'll wrap up the armor section with a full breakdown of every boot in the game. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe and come hang out in the Discord. You'll find community discussions, premium giveaways, update notifications, and a place to just vibe with other Albion players. Alright guys, starting with the plate armor, everyone that's serious about tanking should definitely know about the Guardian armor. The Guardian armor has the Enfeeble Aura ability on it, which is an AoE around you that decreases the damage of all enemies affected by it by 60%. Now the ability looks like this, and as you can see, it's a huge AoE, and as you may notice as well, it's a toggle ability, meaning that enemies cannot get rid of this ability in any way. They cannot purge it whatsoever. Once you activate the Enfeeble Aura, it will stay activated until you cancel it or until it runs out. Now, aside from the damage debuff that the Enfeeble Aura makes for, it also slows the enemies a little, and it also reveals invisible enemies when they get in touch with this aura. Now, the Guardian armor is a very affordable armor because it's not an artifact, and because of its huge damage debuff, it's very popular in both PvE and PvP content. Basically, if you are doing any kind of group PvE content, you always want to have a Guardian armor with you, as the damage debuff is just very strong against mobs, and it allows tanks to pull a bunch of mobs together and negate a lot of the damage through this buff. So whether you do group dungeons, static dungeons, or group camps in the open world, as long as you are doing group PvE content, it's always a huge positive to have a Guardian armor with you. As for the Guardian armor in PvP, it's definitely used in a lot of group content as well, starting from the smallest groups all the way to the biggest ZVZs in Albion Online, which are the biggest fights that take place. Now in PvP, the Guardian armor can be played both in the enemy backline, where you CC the enemy team, so you use a bunch of crowd control, but you also need some defenses for yourself, so you don't get one hit, and you can actually stay in the enemy backline. But the Guardian armor can also be played in your own backline. If you need to peel for your healers and other squishy team members, the Guardian armor is highly effective as a defensive tool there as well. So if you want to play a defensive tank, whether it's in PvE or PvP, you can't go wrong with the Guardian armor. And it's pretty much a must pick if you are serious about tanking. Now, aside from the huge damage debuff this ability makes for, it also slows enemies a little, and it reveals invisible enemies around you. Therefore, if you see a priority target going invisible near your Zerg, you can just pop the Guardian armor and reveal them before they get a chance to do huge damage against your team. Now, the Guardian armor, although it's very effective in any type of group content, is an item that also has been meta across solo PvP as well. Now, it's not an item you'll want to take for solo PvE, as plate armors just don't make for enough damage through their base stats. However, it has seen some use in solo PvP as well, such as in corrupted dungeons and the mists. Now, if you do take them to any kind of solo PvP content, keep in mind that this ability also decreases your damage by 15%, so hold off from those big hits as long as the Enfeeble Aura is active. The second plate armor you should definitely know about if you like to play a defensive tank or more of a supportive role is the Judicator armor. The Judicator armor makes for a huge AoE that you can place on the ground, which will increase your defenses and your healing received. And not only does this ability affect you, but it affects up to 10 allies, making for a very strong party-wide sustained buff. Now, the Judicator armor, just like the Guardian armor, has the advantage that it's not an ability that can be purged. Therefore, enemies cannot get rid of it. However, unlike the Guardian armor's ability, this one stays in one place and doesn't move with you. So there is a slight drawback in that, especially since PvP battles tend to move fast, which makes the usage of the Judicator armor slightly more difficult because you need to time it well. Especially when the enemy is about to hit you with big hits, or you see an engage coming, that's typically when you want to proc the Judicator armor to benefit from that extra sustain it makes for. Now the Judicator armor is typically seen on defensive tank and support players. Although other roles can take it as well, those are the two main roles that take the Judicator armor. As for what kind of content the Judicator armor is used in, it can be seen in both PvE and PvP content. Sometimes people like to take the Judicator armor instead of the Guardian armor for PvE, which is a viable option as well. At the end of the day, it does make for extra defenses and it does make for more healing. It's also a very popular armor in various group PvP content, starting from instance content such as the Crystal Arena and the Hellgates, all the way to the biggest ZVZ battles in Albion Online. The only place where you don't see the Judicator armor is in solo and duo type of content, but outside of that, it's a very strong ability that's used across a lot of different PvE and PvP content. So if you want to bring extra defenses to your party and overall better sustain because of higher healing, then the Judicator armor is definitely something you'll want to consider. Up next we have the Demon armor, and this is a very specialized type of armor. If you are a beginner watching this, I would highly recommend not using the Demon armor until you are more experienced within the game. Now, although the Demon armor, just like the Guardian armor and Judicator armor, is an armor that's used by defensive tanks and support type of players, it does have a very high skill ceiling in that you need to know a lot about how fights typically play out to utilize this armor's ability fully. In fact, if you use the Demon armor's ability wrong, which looks like this, you will end up getting one shot yourself. So what the Demon armor does is, once you proc it, you will decrease your own resistances by a lot. Although you are in plate armor, you will become very vulnerable against damage. And I'm opening with that because although that's not the positive side of this armor, it is a very strong factor you cannot ignore when you take the Demon armor. As for what the ability itself actually does is, you start channeling this huge shield that increases the resistances of affected allies, making them far tankier, and it's definitely a tool that will stop enemies from one-tapping your allies. And aside from buffing them, you also reflect 50% of the incoming damage back at the attackers, making the Demon armor a very strong defensive tool. However, I emphasize once again, your own damage resistance will drop by a ton. Therefore, you cannot use this ability wrongly because you will end up dying within a second before you even notice what hit you. Which is also why the Demon armor is almost never played alone. So when people go about using the Demon armor, they typically run at least 2 Demon armors, and those two stick to each other so that they can benefit from each other's damage resistance buff, which kind of balances the damage resistance debuff they lose themselves through using this ability. So basically, you'll want to communicate with the other Demon armor users and proc them at the same time. Now the Demon armor is a channel ability and it's one that cannot be interrupted, which means that once you proc it, enemies cannot get rid of it with a purge whatsoever. So basically, when someone procs the Demon armor, you don't want to hit that area or that person any longer, because you will take a lot of reflect damage back at you whenever you go about doing damage on a Demon armor. Now, as you can hear, the Demon armor does have some layers of difficulty to it. It's also very important that you know exactly when you should and shouldn't use the Demon armor's ability, because it comes with huge drawbacks. Therefore, it's definitely an item you don't want to take to PvE content, and it's strictly for the bigger group PvP type of content in Albion Online. So you'll especially see the Demon armors being used in ZVZ type of content, but people tend to start using them starting from small scale type of content, which is anything that's a group size of 20 players or more. So don't take the Demon armor to PvE content whatsoever, and absolutely don't play this armor when you are playing solo, because it doesn't do anything positive for you. Therefore, my advice to any beginner is that you shouldn't touch the Demon armor until you are in a guild that teaches you how to utilize the Demon armor properly. Then we have our plate armor that makes for the damage option, the soldier armor. The soldier armor makes for the fury ability, and whenever you use this ability, you will start a stacking buff that increases your damage on every tick and your crowd control effects. Now this buff stacks up to 8 times, and once it's at the max stacks, you will deal an additional 72% damage, which is a huge amount of damage that truly turns you into a juggernaut, as you will benefit from the high defenses plate armors make for by default. And aside from that bonus, your crowd control effects are also increased up to 40%, so when you hit something like a stun, the enemies simply will be stunned forever. Now the soldier armor is actually one of the few armors that's super viable in solo play. But not only is it popular in solo, but it's popular across a lot of different PvP content within the game. Now, although the soldier armor makes for a huge damage buff through its fury ability, it's not an armor you'll typically want to take to solo PvE content. In fact, it's not an armor you'll want to take to any PvE content. In PvP, however, it's viable all the way from solo to the bigger group fights in Albion Online. Now, since this ability is a buff, it is very vulnerable against purges, and it's definitely something you should look out for yourself as well. So whenever you see someone use the soldier armor and they proc this ability, you definitely want to A, stop hitting them, or purge them and get rid of the ability altogether. It's definitely not an ability you'll want enemies to stack. Now the condition for it to stack is that you should be taking damage. So if an enemy goes invisible or if an enemy stops attacking you, you shouldn't use the Fury ability either, and just wait until they start attacking you again so that you can actually utilize this buff. So if you go about doing PvP and you want to have high base defensive stats and you want an armor that makes for additional damage and additional crowd control effects, you'll definitely want to take the soldier armor. Then we have our next category of plate armors that make for insane crowd control, starting with the first one, which is the Knight Armor. The Knight Armor makes for the Wind Wall ability, and this is probably one of the strongest crowd controls within the game. Just to showcase you what it looks like, it's a wind wall that you cast in front of you like this, and as you can see, it's very wide, making it ideal to block people from advancing altogether, especially if you use it on a choke like this. As they get in contact with the wind wall, they will get knocked back a lot, and they will also have all of their buffs purged. So if they are using something like a sprint whatsoever, if they have any damage buffs going on, they will simply lose it all. While you are casting the wind wall, you will have your own damage resistances and crowd control resistances increased by a ton. It's an ability that stacks up to 5 times, making for an insane amount of resistances, in which once it reaches the max stacks, you will barely take any damage. And as if that wasn't enough, you also get immunity to purges whilst you are casting the wind wall, making you truly invulnerable against pretty much anything. So if you like the idea of playing a disruptive tank that stops enemies from advancing, you definitely want to play the Knight Armor. Now, as you just learned about the Knight Armor and know what it does now, you already know that this is not a PvE armor. This is an armor you strictly use for PvP content, and it's usually an armor that sees play in the bigger fights within Albion Online. However, it's also an armor that's used in ganking a lot and can be played across all the different PvP contents. It's very popular in duo content where people play one-shot builds, such as in the Hellgates or the Duo Mists. Very popular in instanced PvP content such as the Depths, but also very popular in solo PvP content. Therefore, the Knight Armor is a very versatile and flexible armor you can use across a lot of different PvP content. If you like the idea especially of becoming a defensive tank, a support type of player that stops entire Zergs from advancing, the Knight Armor is an armor you'll want to consider. Up next we have our second crowd control armor, which is the Duskweaver armor. Just like the Knight Armor, the Duskweaver armor also can stop entire Zergs from moving through its mythical web ability. Now, whenever you use this ability, you will place this huge AoE on the ground that slows enemies and removes all of their movement speed buffs. So if you use it inside the enemy team whenever they are trying to retreat or whenever they are trying to advance, you can completely sabotage their plans and turn them completely immobile. So the Mythical Web ability is simply a huge anti-mobility type of crowd control effect. Now once again, this is an armor you'll only want to take in PvP content. It just doesn't serve any purpose in PvE content at all. And when it comes to PvP, it's once again an armor that's very popular in the biggest ZVZ fights, and various groups typically start using it starting small scale, so groups of 20 or bigger. And outside of that, you could consider it as an option for ganking. And sometimes it's also played in smaller groups as well, such as on the roads of Avalon, where there are groups of 7. But it is a pretty niche armor that doesn't see much play outside of those contents. So once again, if you like to play a stopper type of role, if you like to turn your enemies immobile, the Duskweaver armor is an excellent pick. Then we have our next plate armor that makes for crowd control, the Armor of Valor. The Armor of Valor's ability required whenever you use it looks like this. It's a channel, meaning you cannot use any abilities whilst you are using this armor's ability, but you can still move. Now your movement speed is slowed by 30%, so keep that in mind while you are channeling this ability. As for what it does when you channel this ability, first of all, your damage resistances are increased by a lot, meaning you become way tankier and you take less damage. And secondly, whenever you take damage while you are channeling this ability, you will shoot a magic orb back at the attacker, silencing them and dealing damage for every hit they do. So whenever someone pops the required ability, you do not want to attack them, especially if you are attacking fast. You will reflect a lot of damage back at yourself. Now the Armor of Valor's ability simply makes for a huge disrupt, while also making for a lot of pressure through the damage it does back at you. Therefore, it's an ability you definitely want to be careful of whenever you see it popped. Now once again, we're looking at the plate armor that doesn't have any use in PvE whatsoever. Once again, we're strictly talking a plate armor that's PvP only. As for its popularity in PvP, it starts all the way from solo, think of Mists, think of Corrupted Dungeons, all the way to the biggest fights in Albion Online. In between all the PvP content that's sitting between solo and ZVZ, you barely see the Armor of Valor being used, but it certainly can be used there as well. Personally, I consider the Armor of Valor a more specialized type of armor you only want to take if it actually adds value to your build and you know exactly what you are doing with it. So although the Armor of Valor does a bunch of things and definitely is a very strong armor, you'll only want to use it with very specific builds and in very specific scenarios. Up next, we have another plate armor that makes for a crowd control. However, unlike the 3 armors we covered so far, this one has only one use case. We're talking about the Graveguard armor that makes for the Soul Chain ability, which is only used in ganking. Now the Soul Chain ability simply latches a chain onto the selected target and after a couple seconds will pull the target towards you. Now this ability looks like this, so you can attach it to someone and then run away, and after 2 seconds your chain will drag them towards you, making this ability ideal for ganking. Now whoever you are in the world of Albion Online, this is the single scariest armor you should definitely know about and look out for. Because if you see a Graveguard in the open world, there is a very big chance you're walking straight into a ganking group. So once you see someone in the open world with a Graveguard armor, just do a 180 and turn back to safety, because nothing positive can be on the other side of that person. There's only one fact you should know about the Graveguard armor, aside from the fact it's a very strong crowd control that's used by gankers, which is that once you get pulled by a Graveguard armor's Soul Chain ability, you become immune to any soul chains that follow for 10 seconds. So if you are transporting in the black zones and you want to have the best chances, the best odds of surviving gankers, and especially surviving the Graveguard armor, which is the scariest ability by far, you definitely want to have a soldier helmet with you, as that makes you immune to all crowd control effects. And if you want to learn more about the soldier helmet or other helmets in general, make sure to watch the first episode in which I went over all the different helmets. So the Graveguard armor strictly for ganking and nothing else. Then we have our final plate armor, which is the Royal Armor. The Royal Armor simply makes for the energy source ability, which is an AoE around you that looks like this. And depending on how many people you hit, you will restore energy not only for yourself, but also for nearby allies. So the Royal Armor is simply an AoE team-wide energy sustain type of buff. So one big advantage of having a Royal Armor in your group is that other party members typically don't have to worry about energy sustain, and instead of taking helmets, pots, or capes that make for energy sustain, they can take something more defensive, offensive, or something that makes for party-wide utility. Now the Royal Armor has one drawback, which is that it is considered a buff, so people can purge it and remove the buff altogether. As for what kind of content you'll typically see the Royal Armor in, it's usually used in 5v5 Hellgates, previously in 10v10s too, but that content got deleted. But outside of 5v5 Hellgates, I haven't really seen the Royal Armor much, but that doesn't mean it's not viable whatsoever. If you want a party-wide energy sustain source, the Royal Armor is an excellent pick. Then there is one more ability left we should definitely go over in this video, which is the Taunt ability that can be found on every plate armor within the game. It's simply the second ability that can be found on all the different plate armors, as it comes from the plate armor tree line. Now this ability is the classic taunt that all tanks in all MMORPGs should have access to, so no exceptions in Albion whatsoever. We have a taunt here as well. Whenever you use this ability, you simply become the highest priority target for the mob you have selected, taking away all the aggro from your other party members. It simply looks like this. It's a very straightforward ability, and not only does it affect your current target, but you will also increase your threat to mobs around you. So if you ever run into those bosses that like to target random party members, you can always swap to Taunt as a tank to make sure the boss just prioritizes you. Outside of those very specific bosses where the taunt can be very useful, you don't really ever want to use the taunt in PvE, and especially in PvP, you just never want to use this ability as it does nothing good for you. Therefore, just remember, if you are playing plate, if you are tanking, you have access to the taunt ability for the difficult bosses, but outside of that, you never want to use this ability. And that wraps up the plate armors in Albion Online. If you found it useful, make sure to give it a like and let me know in the comments what new things you learned through this video. Up next is the final armor category, boots, so make sure to subscribe if you wish to get notified whenever that one's up. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.